The WNBA season starts tomorrow, and the Next's Adler is here to chat all about the next preseason awards, from team performance predictions to individual award predictions, matchups to watch, and more. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and happy Monday. You are locked on to women's basketball. I'm Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. If this is your first time listening to Locked On Women's Basketball, welcome. And we at The Next have over 100 reported pieces every single month, including 198 in March and more than 100 in April. We have a beat reporter on every single WNBA team, one on more than 15 different NCAA beats, so get that YouTube subscription up. And you can also support us by subscribing to The Next, $9 a month, $72 a year at thenexthoops.com. Today, we'll be talking all about the Next's preseason awards, including team performance predictions, individual award predictions, matchups to watch throughout the season, and more. Joining me today is the Adler, who covers the WNBA and college basketball, focusing on player development and the game behind the game for us at The Next. So we're back. This is our second annual, podcast about the Next preseason awards and predictions. Before we dive into the results, can you just break down the process for our listeners about what went into the creation of the survey and your story?
Of course. So the process is what I do basically 3 times a year, right before the season, middle of the season, and close to the end of the season. Send out a Google form to everyone on staff, everyone who's pretty much a regular or a full-time, not full-timer. Everyone who's a regular or a big contributor here in some way, shape, or form will fill it out. So you end up getting pretty much all of our beat writers, more than a couple national folks, and some, passersby commentators who fill out pretty much most of the things I asked them to. This has trimmed down over the years as I was a little overeager in some of the early years and asked for a lot more stuff than I think was necessary. And so now it's streamlined. You open it up, you pick your favorite teams, you pick your least favorite. Well, I shouldn't say favorites. You pick your title favorites, who you think is most likely to end up in the lottery, pick a couple awards, and bing, bada, boom, you're done.
Yes, I know. I filled it out. We had, for the first time, I think, a photographer fill it out, editors, our beat writers. So definitely one of my favorite times of year. The first question you asked, aside from name, was about the title favorites. So from what we all answered and you collected and put into a lovely chart, who were the title favorites, and did we at The Next agree for the most part?
So unsurprisingly, pretty much everyone agreed that the primary title favorite is, of course, Las Vegas. Vegas earned, I want to say, they earned not 10 of 12. That's not the right numbers. They earned 12 of 14 first place votes, or 11 of 14. It was something like that. Suffice to say that is more than anyone got in the prior couple of years in terms of leading the vote share. Anyone who's familiar with the way that I've done these articles before knows that I like to use percent vote share. That's how they do it in terms of MVP voting. That's how they do it on the men's side for a number of awards as well. It's the easiest way, I think, to show when you have a sort of ranked choice voting, which, like I said, I asked you to pick multiple title favorites. And when I ask you to pick a number 1, number 2, it's not just what your number 1 is, but when I ask, who are the teams you think are most likely to participate, then, it's even more apparent how dominant Vegas is. Vegas leads the way there pretty much as on the average ballot, they were ranked more than number 2, whereas, New York was next up and they couldn't even crack 50%. So again, I think it's easy to say that Vegas is probably the odds-on favorite for the title, to no one's surprise.
But I mean, obviously we need to see how the season plays out. And then on the other end of the spectrum, was there a consensus as to who the bottom two teams in the league were expected to be?
We didn't get it's interesting. We did not really get a consensus on the bottom two. Most people, maybe half the voters, thought it'd be Chicago, which makes sense. If I ask you can you give me a bottom tier? I think most people would respond in some way, shape, or form that we're looking at Chicago, LA, and Washington. Opinions can differ one way or the other on them, but I think, again, for the most part, you are looking at those three teams, and Chicago, I think, just happened to be the one that people were most confident in. But you get a whole host of other votes in there. People are voting for Atlanta, Minnesota, Phoenix, and when you look at that with in contrast to sort of going by vote share, Chicago is like barely over 50%, and then you just have a very funny graph where it just looks like stairs going down because it's so evenly spaced between Chicago to LA to Washington. And again, we got Phoenix, Atlanta, and Minnesota in there, which, a couple votes here and there can skew the numbers. It is interesting to me that I think, some people would say Minnesota is an obvious second round playoff team. Atlanta, you can go either way with that. It is interesting to see them sort of, a lot of people would say that, although no one's putting them in the title race, but also to see them on this graph too.
And then Phoenix was, I believe, the only team to end up in getting a top two vote, but also getting a bottom two vote as well.
Yes, and that is the second time that's happened in 3 years. Last year we had that with Dallas, and I think if Phoenix has a season this year like Dallas did last year, I think a lot of people would be happy with that. But you look on paper at what Phoenix has done, it's a lot of talent. It is interesting how it comes together. They have exactly one bench guard. It's Shug Sutton. They're relying on a lot of wings to come up with a lot of ball handling that maybe won't happen. They're relying on a 42-year-old Diana Taurasi. They're relying on Brittany Griner, who might not actually play tomorrow because she didn't play in the second preseason game, and we don't really have a timetable on her as far as I can tell with respect to what she's currently dealing with. This could go one of two ways, and I'm excited for it. I think they've shown some interesting things in the preseason with respect to what they're doing under Nate Tibbetts, but I think you can look at them and sort of use them as like a Rorschach test.
And then moving on to kind of the offense and then defense as well. So who was predicted to have the best and the worst offense? We'll start there.
So unsurprisingly, best offense was Vegas, but it's a tie this time. It's between Vegas and New York, two teams who led the league last year. Vegas by a decent margin over New York, but they were the clear 1-2, as Vegas was also the clear number one the year before that. I think it's interesting, at the very least, to have a tie between Vegas and New York, just given the fact that Vegas was, I think, pretty comfortably over New York last year, and they added Megan Gustafson, who is a very solid, play finishing big. If anything, they might be a little bit better. We'll see based on injuries. Chelsea Gray is going to miss a little bit of time to start the season with a lingering foot injury from the finals that she had. On the other end of things, it's Chicago. I think that one was not too terribly difficult for people to agree on, although we did get some votes for LA and Washington in there. Again, these are teams with solid bases. I don't want to be too pessimistic. I don't want to make it seem like, they're just sort of stuck in the mire here. But you're starting basically 4 of your maybe 6 best players are all centers, or power forward, or non-spacing power forwards. That's not going to make for good offense anyway. But you throw in that you're only spacers are Dana Evans and Brianna Mabry, and it's not a terrible, unfun to watch team, but it is one that this is not going to be easy, is how I'd put it.
And someone has to have the worst offense in the league.
Right.
That's just how it works mathematically. And then on the other side of the ball, can you just break down who was expected or who we expect to have the best and the worst defense?
The best defense the best defenses we'd been voting for are, unsurprisingly, much like offense, the 2 teams that led the league last year. And it's the 2 people who are probably going to be vying for Defensive Player of the Year, which we'll get to in a little bit, with Las Vegas and Connecticut. New York, Phoenix, Washington, each of them earned 1 vote. I venture to say that Washington might be on there a little bit more on reputation than on actual outlook. But with Vegas and Connecticut, they earned the vast majority of the votes here, and it's hard not to see why. Again, Vegas, with everything they did last year is basically returning everyone who played the last 2/3 of the season. Connecticut, they're getting a full season of healthy Brianna Jones. They didn't lose any major defensive talent from last year. And it's pretty safe to say they'll be up top. On the other hand, worst defense is funny. Worst defense is great because no one's really sure. Chicago did win this vote, but only by a very small margin and not with that many votes actually. So you have them, and again, you got a lot of centers. Things could go decently on defense. I could see it being passable. You have Indiana, which is basically relying on Aaliyah Boston to be prime Sylvia Fowles to avoid giving up 90 points a game. I don't remember if I voted for them, to be quite honest, but I do see the votes going there. Atlanta's surprising to me. They have excellent guard defense. They don't have excellent interior defense, so I think I can see it there. And then weirdly, we have votes for, we have a little bit of voting for Connecticut, Dallas, LA, Minnesota, and New York all earned one vote. Not sure I can justify all of those, but I can tell you that it's at least not going to be a bad defensive season across the league.
I will sell myself out, and maybe I'll be roasted across the internet after, but I will admit I was the person that voted for Washington to have the best defense. I didn't want to vote, on paper and just go with everything from last year. That wanted to at least be a little interesting, but I will admit to that.
Certainly possible if Shakira Austin keeps getting better.
So coming up next, we'll dive into some of the individual awards and more. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make PrizePicks the #1 fantasy sports app. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions and special offers for the biggest moments in sports. PrizePicks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. One of my favorite things about PrizePicks is that it even offers injury insurance so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, PrizePicks will have your back and not count that as a loss. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's right. If you download the PrizePicks app today, you can use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Today's episode is brought to you by Magic Spoon. My New Year's resolution was to add more protein to my diet, and Magic Spoon makes that easier and more delicious than ever. You can get Magic Spoon in a variety pack. The 4 flavors are cocoa, fruity, frosted, and peanut butter. This pack has 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and 4 to 5 grams of net carbs. It's only 140 calories a serving. It's high protein, has 0 grams of sugar, it's keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, and soy-free. Magic Spoon is so delicious and crunchy. My favorite flavor is peanut butter, but I truly love them all. Go to magicspoon.com/lockedon to grab a variety pack and try it today. And be sure to use our promo code LOCKEDON at checkout to save $5 off your order. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, start your day off right with a delicious bowl of high-protein cereal at magicspoon.com/lockedon and use code LOCKEDON to save $5 off. Thank you, Magic Spoon, for sponsoring this episode. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, getting into our individual awards, A'ja Wilson is largely seen as the MVP favorite this season. Do you think it's her award to lose, or could other players play their way into contention?
I don't think you can ever really consider an award, in the preseason at least, as someone to lose, unless we're talking about like 3 years ago when Brianna Jones in Connecticut, the 6th Player of the Year award. She has won 2 MVPs in the past 4 years. If that math should be correct. She won 2 MVPs in the past 4 years. She was one of the best players in league history during the playoffs last year. What she did to New York during the finals is the kind of stuff that I have never seen before, outside of like prime Candace Parker, in terms of absolutely everything she was able to do. I think even with her finals MVP award, it might have gone underappreciated just how much she was doing, especially on the defensive end of the court there. But, we still have the clear-cut 2 best players in the league. Love Alyssa Thomas. Last year was probably her year. Again, great player, but we're not talking about Asia or Stewie when it comes to AT. I think it just makes sense that Asia is sort of that level, especially, Stewie wasn't quite herself during the playoffs. I'm not going to say that, she's on the downswing, but Asia is, I think, just a top performer when she wants to or needs to be. And I think, if she wants to come out swinging after losing last year's MVP race, it's hers if she wants it.
And you alluded to this in our last segment, and I believe it was on our mid-season awards podcast last year. We were talking about Alyssa Thomas as the front runner for Defensive Player of the Year. Could this be her year? I know we at the Next also had quite a few votes for Asia Wilson in this year's preseason picks for Defensive Player of the Year.
I honestly don't know. Because obviously it was pretty close last year, but if Alyssa Thomas didn't win last year, I'm not sure what she needs to do. Maybe just hope Asia takes some games off. They're going to be a little bit better defensively this year, but they're also going to be relying on Alyssa Thomas a little bit less because she needed to make up so much ground. She needed to fill so many roles. When Bree Jones was out last year, and it was unbelievable what she was able to do. So I think narratively there's a little less emphasis there just because, again, she's not going to be having to do as much. So maybe she gets more steals because Brianna Jones is going to force more errant passes, just having more gravity or defensive gravity on the court. But on the other hand, again, she's going to be not quite having to do as much. So the narrative and the coverage of the insane thing she did last year probably won't be there as much. I think, there's always voter fatigue, and it's always hard to measure what happens with defense. And I think that especially weighs on voters a lot. We're still very dependent on steals and blocks numbers when it comes to these awards. You can see this with a couple years ago when Brittany Sykes finished second. This is really difficult to parse, and it would not surprise me if, someone who received a vote here like Aaliyah Boston was a true contender when we revisit this in September.
And then, I think as it was last year or throughout the process of us doing this, voting for 6th Player of the Year was quite close. Who are kind of the top contenders, and what are they going to have to do to stand out this season other than continue coming off the bench?
Right. That was an issue I had with this. Is an issue we have pretty much every year is we'll vote for people who are probably going to come off the bench or at least shaping up to be that. And then I look at the preseason and I go, sorry, voter so-and-so, I actually need you. It looks like Dejanay Carrington is starting. Or, sorry, so-and-so, Tina Charles is not coming off the bench. I need you to change your pick. And that just happens sometimes with how this works. This year is especially kind of weird. Again, Alicia Clark is getting up there in age, but she won last year with a very solid share of the vote. The players who were her runners-up in terms of the actual award, Dejanay Carrington, Dana Evans, they're now in their starting lineups. What happens in Phoenix, I think, will be interesting. I can see Sophie Cunningham. I should say we had a lot of votes for Sophie Cunningham or Rebecca Allen. I just sort of took all those votes and pushed them together because each of them has played in one preseason game, and that was the preseason game that the other did not play in. My inclination is to say that Cunningham starts and Beck comes off the bench, just given their respective histories, both in those roles and the fact that one of them is new to the team. But I don't know. No one's really asked Nate Tibbetts, as far as I can tell. They're certainly going to be dealing with, people going in and out of the lineup, whether that's Brittany Griner missing. I don't want to say she is, but it's possible she might miss a game or two to start the season. Diana Taurasi is obviously not playing 40 games. Even between these two players, something might happen. So they might come close to both qualifying. They might come close to neither qualifying. I can see that going really either way. And it makes sense to me that there aren't a lot of standouts here.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how that plays out. And coming up next, we'll wrap up our discussion about the next preseason awards and predictions and talk about what we're most looking forward to this season as individuals. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. As the NBA playoffs are heating up, make sure to check out the Parlay Builder and Star Player props as well. The NHL playoffs are well into the second round, so make sure to check out the daily specials and league specials as the playoffs continue. The WNBA season also starts tomorrow, so make sure to check that out too, including the opening day specials. There's also so much to choose from, including championship odds, player awards, season specials, and more. There's even a Caitlin Clark WNBA special section as well, where you can bet on her first regular season basket being a three-pointer, her recording 3 or more triple-doubles in the 2024 regular season, and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So this is a question that you ask all the time. What on-court trends are we looking forward to seeing that our listeners should keep an eye on?
So, to take people behind the scenes for a second, and this is sort of a boring thing I do always with a question or two here, but the thing is when I ask this, to make sure I'm directing people to sort of the right genre to answer, when I put this, it's always, what are we looking forward to? And then I put in little parentheses. For example, I think I have, for example, switch everything defense. Last year it might have been like double big lineups or guard screens. And it's always hard for me because I know that I'm priming people to think about those specific terms. So when those pop up in the responses, I'm always like, were you thinking about this before, or are you thinking about this because I told you to? Thankfully, we certainly did have some interesting ones this year. People think there's unsurprisingly going to be more switching, which the league has very slowly moved in the direction of. For those of you ball screen coverage heads out there, there's been a lot of hedging. It's basically how the league's been built. We're much like sort of the early 2010s, late aughts NBA was. That is, slowly getting taken out behind the woodshed when you play teams like New York, when you play teams like Vegas, probably when you play teams like Indiana this year. And I think it certainly makes sense that we'll move more in that direction. Probably going to move more in the direction of drop defense as well, sort of making its resurgence, but we'll see when it came to that. Not a lot of people agreed on things beyond that, which is always fun. We're definitely going to see slight uptick in more guard screening as we get more ideas trickling down from the NBA to the WNBA to maximize, the wing guard talent coming in. I think a lot of people are just pointing to overall better offensive efficiency, whether that's someone saying, early shots in the clock or like pick and rolls closer to the half court line, or someone suggesting that offensive efficiency increases because players will be more rested from using charter flights.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Still, we're not sure how the charter flights are going to play out, but excited to see if that hopefully maybe makes an impact with more rest as the season continues.
We do know that a couple teams are using charters for their opening games tomorrow, but we know that New York is not for its first couple.
Yeah, so we'll just see how that plays out. One of my favorite questions you asked was about how we were feeling about a season without Candace Parker. What were some of the responses?
They were all sad, honestly. Most people said they felt like they lost something or that something was missing. Genuinely, the word sad popped up in literally half of the answers. Some people are just looking forward to at least seeing her broadcast more. Some people are looking forward to maybe at least seeing some more players take the stage in her stead. But I think most people are either sad or at least glad that she's happy with it, it seems.
Yeah, for me, it was definitely, I can't remember where I saw this information, probably on Twitter, about there only being one player left in the league, Isabel Harrison, who played under Pat Summitt. So it feels like in that way, an era is coming to an end.
Yeah, that's insane. For me, it's just like I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of like how we define WNBA eras. It's a nebulous concept anyway, but there has not been a WNBA without Candace Parker since Lisa Leslie basically won her last MVP award.
Wow.
That is hard to imagine, I think, for me. Just with everything that has changed, she's always been just one of, if not the best player out there. And now it's just not even a farewell tour, frankly.
Yeah. And that may be what she wanted. But definitely, looking forward to the specifics you write up in the story and seeing, how it's continued to talk about throughout the season. Did we at the Next agree on who the biggest free agency ad was? And do you think we got it right, or we'll just have to wait and see?
That was so that unsurprisingly, I think is mostly down to a couple people, which, makes sense when you look at how the offseason went. For the most part, it's either Skylar Diggins-Smith or Nneka Ogwumike, right? You are adding two basically top 10 players to the league. The last time Skylar Diggins-Smith had a healthy season, she finished, was that the third? I think it might have been third, but I'm pretty sure it was fourth. Yeah, she finished fourth in our internal MVP voting at the end of the 2022 season. You're adding that player after she has a year off. It's not like she wasn't doing anything, but she doesn't have the wear and tear of basketball on her body. You're adding Nneka, who was a borderline all-W talent last year. I think it makes sense that those two players are atop this. We had a couple votes for Natasha Cloud as well, which you're adding a point guard to a team that needs a point guard. She's a premier defender, an excellent leader. This was definitely not as much of a star-studded free agency group as the year before, when the overwhelming answer was Stewie, but JJ and Sloot were right there too. But I think it remains clear that there's a couple names there, and it's going to be really weird seeing each of them in a Storm jersey. I can't lie, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah, really excited to watch the Storm, even if it involves staying up way past my bedtime this year. Mm-hmm. And I know today is the last day for rosters to be cut down, and you rolled out the survey before cuts really started happening. Collectively, how are we feeling about the rookie class? Better than last year's class? Worse?
Everyone thinks it's going to be better, which is unsurprising. The last year's class was basically Aaliyah Boston and some other folk. And this year is Caitlin Clark, who, no offense to Aaliyah Boston, is just a smidgen tier better of a prospect. And then more than just other folk, like people who you would actually go out of your way to tank to get on your team. And Cameron Brink, you also have Camila Cardoso, Rickea Jackson. You have big names here. And I think part of it is names driving the responses, and part of it is the talent driving the responses, right? Dallas could be starting a rookie in their starting lineup in JC Sheldon. Even I think the lesser known names in this class are players who could be positive contributors from day one. And we didn't not have those players last year, but we didn't quite have enough of them to make an overwhelmingly good all rookie team at the end of the season. This year, that's definitely not going to be the case.
Yeah, excited to see that play out. Do you want to quickly run through some of the matchups that we want our listeners and our readers to put on our calendars? Well, according to us, they can put whatever they want on their calendar.
Of course. Of course, the matchups all involve basically one of two things. It's either one of those top three teams in the league, the ones that have, big star, not necessarily all title favorites, but all have big star power and all have title aspirations. Vegas, New York, Seattle. It's either one of those three things, or it's Caitlin Clark. That's the responses. It's Vegas, New York. It's surprisingly Indiana, Phoenix. I don't know what the juice is there. Beyond, obviously, it's Diana Taurasi and Caitlin Clark.
I think that's it.
I find it funny that is the number 2 matchup that came up for us beyond the title rematch. So basically everyone said title rematch, then Clark and Taurasi. Vegas, Seattle renews their rivalry. Seattle and Phoenix, that's an excellent rivalry that's going to be, coming back into contention this year. Maybe you want to watch New York, Seattle for similar reasons to the top teams. And then last one, which I think most people listening are probably aware of and getting ready for, the couple of rookies in Chicago going into Indiana.
Yeah. And then last question, what are you most looking forward to this season?
The thing I think that I'm most looking forward to is seeing the variety in what's going on around the league. I think I've said this in years past, but especially in watching the NBA, I like NBA basketball. And it's really fun. It's not quite as varied, I think, in style as the W tends to be. I wrote about this in my article a couple days ago, but Atlanta is running the clock back to 2011 with how they're playing. Seattle is trying to basically recreate like an excellent like 2021 or 22 team. You have Vegas, who are I still call them the light years aces, and then you have pretty much everything in between. And I'm excited to see, again, can New York push it to the same level of offensive flow that can actually challenge the aces in that realm this year, I think more in the playoffs than it did last year. What are we going to see out of Indiana, and how are they going to maximize the really uniquely overwhelming offensive talent they have there? I think sort of across the league, you have a lot of different styles coming together, and it's just fun to see how that all matches out because there's so much talent and so many different ways that they manifest.
Yeah, I'm personally excited to see the younger players or international players that haven't played or haven't played a lot in the league. I think Julie Van Loo is a 30 or 31-year-old rookie in Washington. Just how they make an impact and see those stories get told throughout the season.
Van Loo is a dark horse all rookie player. She threw some like actually mind-boggling passes in the preseason.
Yeah, excited to see that. And thank you for joining me today, Em. Where can the listeners find you online?
Of course. So listeners can always find me writing for our site at least every week on Sunday mornings with the Sunday Notes column that checks in on trends and random stuff I'm seeing around the league. They can also check me out with Hunter and Lincoln on our Saturday podcast, where we go into different things about scouting, whether it's how we look at players around the league, how different talent development infrastructures are set up in college and around the league. During the college season, we go over draft scouting, and during the summers. So coming up this year, we do some theme around historical drafts. Last year, it was a retrospective on the best prospects in league history. This year, we're going for who were the sort of most underrated prospects at the time of the draft in league history. And you can also find me on Blue Sky at emilyadler.bsky.social, or just, kind of chilling somewhere. Find me in the middle of like a park in New York. Just don't be weird about it.
I'm excited to listen to that new Saturday series, and thanks to our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day, with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. And make sure to tune in the rest of the week to hear from Howard, Gigi, and another episode from me on Friday.